Call the meeting of the Springfield Budget Committee to order. May we have the roll call, please?
Counselor Weber.
Here.
Counselor Moe. Here. Counselor Rodley.
Here.
Counselor Blackwell.
Here.
Counselor Doyle.
Here.
Counselor Fishman. Here. Jason Miller. Here. Devin Marche Duncan.
Here.
Darlene Reich.
Here.
Bruce Linalls. Here. Arthur Iyer. Here. Paul Selby. Here. Chair, we have a quorum.
Okay, I'll read the instructions. As we begin our meeting tonight, I would like to ask members of the audience who are joining us online, please keep yourselves on mute until you're called to provide public testimony. There's one time this evening designated for public testimony and will be listed as business from the audience on the agenda. If you're attending in person, please complete the request to speak card located at the entrance of the library meeting room and give them to the staff. If you're joining us online with a tablet, smartphone, or computer and wish to speak during the time, please use the raised hand options to be called upon to provide comment when the designated time is announced. The order of public testimony is as follows. Anyone in person at City Hall, anyone raise their hand, virtual hand, anyone who has submitted email in advance, and anyone who has submitted written comment via mail in advance. First on the agenda is the public hearing on the use of state shared revenues. Before I open the meeting, I guess we have a presentation. Is that correct?
Yeah, Chair, I'm just going to give a very brief introduction and summary of the purpose of the state shared revenue public hearing, and give a very, abbreviated version or summary of the revenues that are associated with the state shared revenue. And because it's so short, I'm not going to come up to the table if that's all right. But ultimately, the purpose here is just to provide the public with an opportunity to comment and ask questions about the city's use of state shared revenue. And I'll go into on the next slide a little bit more about what the particulars are, what the revenue accounts are that we receive from the state through state shared revenue. But ultimately, what's required of this body is to hold a public hearing. And then from here, we'll hold another public hearing through the budget adoption process for the whole council. And that will then, provide with the state with the steps necessary for the city to then receive our state shared revenue apportionment. So with that, here's a single slide that just summarizes the state shared revenues that the city receives. 2 years of history, the current year's adopted budget, and then what's proposed for 24. So you'll see in the general fund, the majority of what we receive is liquor apportionment. So we receive about 1.2 in that first liquor apportionment line. State shared revenue is another category of liquor apportionment, so close to another $1 million. We receive about 50,000 in cigarette apportionment, and then we're budgeting about $500,000 in our share of marijuana tax. So that's the general fund, or about 2.7 million. In the street fund, the vast majority, really all of it is the state highway apportionment that we receive from ODOT. That totals about 5.4 million, and we allocate about 1% for bicycle and pedestrian use. So that's the street and right-of-way funds. Within the special revenue fund, we are budgeting about 100,000 in marijuana apportionment separately. So in total, about 8.2 million. So unless there are any questions from the committee, I'll turn it back over to the chair to open the public hearing.
Okay, now we're open for public
Question.
Arthur.
How do you come up with the numbers for FY24 proposed?
Well, there's a couple of different strategies that we use. Primarily, we look to the League of Oregon Cities. They put out annually a forecast of what every city's state shared revenue apportionment totals are going to be. So they gather information from ODOT and from other state agencies, looking at what trends are, and what state is forecasting for those state, shared revenues. And the League of Oregon Cities publishes a document every year. So we use that, and then we also just look at what our actual trends have been historically, and then kind of check that against what the league is saying.
Yes.
Question. Exactly what is highway apportionment, management of the public right of way? What does that entail?
So this is the state gas tax, as well as, any of or our portion of registration fees and the, any other ODOT related, tax revenues that they then, apportion out to local governments. But I think the vast majority does come from the state gas tax.
And what do we do with it? Management of the public right of way. What does that mean?
Management of our street infrastructure. Street operations, that'd be Fund 201.
A lot of streets.
Yeah.
Don't go very far. Thank you.
Are there any other questions? We move on to the business. Or let's see.
So we need to have a public hearing on the state shared revenue. So we'll open it up for public comment.
Okay. That's what it is. That's the general public, right?
That's the general public.
Yeah. So do we have any?
Chair, we haven't received any, public comment or request for public comment. Would you like, Chair, it looks like we've got, one, member of the public would like to speak. Chris, you can take a seat at this chair. Carrie, just give me 1 second and I'll pull up the.
So you need to state your name and the ward that you're in.
My name is Chris McAllister and I'm from Ward 3. I'm wanting to speak in particular to the marijuana or cannabis apportionment. When we originally, as a city, set out to have this apportionment, we talked about how would we utilize it to help people who would be otherwise offset by the use of marijuana. So it's just our medical marijuana patients and whatnot. And so having it undefined or undetermined makes it seem like a separation from its original intent, which was to help not only bring in revenues to this community, but also take care of the people who were otherwise displaced. And so if you're going to collect a tax to make sure it serves the people that are affected is what is the apportionment. And so we have a lot more dispensaries who don't serve in the actual medical marijuana process anymore. And so this is why these considerations are important. So whether it's recovery to be able to, or for placement into nursing homes where previous cannabis use may actually currently prevent them from being able to be placed or received. These are some of the ways that those dollars could be done. Now, if we do not cover that in our spectrum of services as a city, then we pass it up to the county to be able to use to serve those folks. Maybe it's a camp for people who are medically fragile. Maybe it's a camp for people who are from here who need to be supported. But that apportionment was meant to serve the greater good. So I just want to make sure that we remember I was at the time of the city patient advocate who helped create some of the codes in our community for this this very tax. Thank you for your time and your service.
Thanks, Chris. Do we have any other?
Chair, I don't believe we have any other, comment.
And then you close the public hearing.
Okay, we can close the public hearing. See. We're going down to the deliberation.
So we open it back up to questions
Okay.
of departments and then just deliberations on the budget.
One thing I noticed when the staff was doing their presentations, about the fact the city never has enough money to do everything, but one thing I didn't hear mentioned is the mandatory things that we have to do, mandates from the state and locals that they make us do, they're no city money for it, so we have to put staff on that, and the public doesn't get served. And well, I want to get money for that, so that's what affects our budget.
Any other comments?
I'm just curious about the marijuana dollars. Is there any stipulation from the state as to what that can be used for? Because it looks like it's just being dumped into the general fund. Is that right?
Well, yeah, I wouldn't phrase it as just dumped into the general fund.
I'm sorry, that's a
But-
bad terminology. It seems to be placed very gently into the.
So let's look at public safety, for instance. We've implemented a body worn camera program, which is an increased cost, and our insurance with our jail, we've seen our medical double, and a lot of that has to do with just, issues with mental health and drug addictions. So we don't have enough funding to cover all that. So essentially, the way we see it, that marijuana apportionment essentially has been completely eaten up by the increased costs that we've seen. And even though we don't tie it directly, it hasn't even covered the full cost of the increases we've seen.
Perfect. Thank you for that clarification.
In multiple work sessions back when it was being looked at, is the council as a group had decided at the time if it was going to be unattached funds or undedicated funds, that we would like to dedicate those to the public safety to cover training. Those particular persons cost overruns at the jail. So it's coming from the marijuana. I wanted to dedicate it all to the public safety that was unfunded.
But what I see in there was that $105,000 of it was under public safety, but then the other portion was not. So that's where I know that the public safety comes out of the general fund, but.
Still in the undirected. It's not encumbered. Am I correct?
So my understanding is there's two marijuana apportionment numbers there. One's
Yes.
in the general fund, one's in the special revenue fund. The special revenue fund, and you're gonna have to remind me, I think, is that the one that has restriction on it, or is that the one where we have a city restriction on it and its
I
use?
believe that's the city restriction, but I'd have to double check.
And so that's available. It's not appropriated for spending right now, so that builds up in reserves, and it's money that's available for public safety initiatives.
Okay.
As directed by council.
Okay. Yeah.
In our packet, we were given the future year considerations and options. And I don't know enough about the details of the budget to know how well it addresses those future year considerations, like how's it going to definitely deal with the ARPA funding. I saw that we were dealing with the ARPA funding sunset, but the options of diversifying our revenue base, is that something that based on this, the city council will then, and the city will start to apply decisions that'll guide towards these options that were presented here?
The future year considerations aren't addressed in the budget. Essentially, those are outside. This budget focuses just on fiscal year 24. But what those are is they provide a context for each department and some of the challenges that they're having that may have budgetary impacts in the future. And so it's really just to provide a context. As it relates to ARPA funding and diversifying the revenue base, that will be a council directed process. We've contracted with Portland State University to do a study, and that's something we'll be bringing back in a study next spring.
Thank you for that answer. What I guess I'm not real clear on is how do we address that $5 million shortfall in future years when I'm not hearing some specific strategies to really carve out that much of a savings or a redirection or a revenue opportunity that really banks it that we're going to remedy that.
So the Portland State University contract is a strategy. This is where we're using a third party that's very familiar with local governance, and they're going to look at what other communities are doing across the state. They're going to bring ideas back to our council with the hopes that those will be implemented. And they're not just going to be diversifying our revenue base.
It's also going to look at potentially service level reductions as well. So we're going to come at it from a lot of different angles, but that is our strategy. The larger is just the challenge we have with funding. And if I go back, funding for local government in the state of Oregon is broken. There is no easy solution. And so that's the hard job of serving on a council and delivering services and kind of navigating the environment that we're in. I wish there were easy solutions. I wish this was a balanced budget, you know, off indefinitely into the future. We don't have the answers. You know, sometimes that's just how it is.
So does this committee, or where does it go from here? If we approve this and we get a response back from that study, is it just put into the next budget process?
The response from the study really is going to be a discussion that's not for this committee, that is going to be a discussion for the city council to have, you know, in our policy direction, you know, is role. So like, even though we're being asked to do the very, very smallest piece, which is just get a budget so we can operate next year. It's going to sort of spark several conversations when we reconvene in council. And then we always have Nancy, who is always concerned about making sure that we, you know, keep the lights on and keep serving the community. Right. So that those conversations aren't going to get lost. They're just going to be, they happen in a different avenue outside of this round table here.
It's on our mind.
Yes. I have a question about performance measures. Expected a groan to come up from the crowd.
But we're excited. We've never heard those before. It's in its infancy right now for us, but it's an initiative of ours, but go on.
Okay. For the city manager's office, there were about 25% of the leases that didn't get updated in some timely fashion, I guess. I'm wondering, I'm guessing that was a fairly small impact on the budget, probably not much of a budgetary impact. Is it fair to say?
That's correct. I mean, the leases that we're talking about have been needing to be addressed for quite some time. And so we're now fully staffed in the city manager's office, but we haven't been for quite some time.
Right.
So there's been a lag in our work. And I think that's something that you will find throughout the city, is that our staffing levels are very lean. So if you have somebody that moves on to different employment, or that is out for like an extended illness or whatever, sometimes things just can't get done because we don't have a backup strength.
There were, as I indicate, as I found in the book, there are four divisions, let's say, that don't have performance measures: community development, fire and life, IT, and legal. Well, IT is a part of financial, I guess, but are there plans for creating performance measures?
Yeah, without going into too much detail on this, we had a PBB initiative some years back, and it was a very process-heavy initiative that we found was taking up a lot of staff time, but we weren't seeing the kind of tangible results that we were hoping from it. And out of that, a lot of performance measures were created. I'll say this delicately, so I probably won't. A lot of the performance measures had no value. And so as we start looking at them and questioning them, we essentially, you know, and I think a lot of departments felt like, oh, we have to create these. And so they just came up with something. So we've told departments, you know what, if you don't like these performance measures, dump them. You don't have to have them. As part of receiving the budget award, which we received for the first time for our fiscal year 23 budget, and we hope to continue, performance management, performance measures is part of that. We're hoping to take another run at it. But this time, what we want to do is look at sort of best practice performance measures because, you know, this is happening across the entire nation, and these measures have been developed. And so we want to implement ones that have real value to the community. But again, that takes staff time, and it's just incremental. So it's a future year project. I think it might have been in our 3-year considerations. I'm unsure, but it's going to be driven on the finance department, and it's probably a few years out in the future still.
Question about human resources. They have a performance measure that talks about a high loss ratio in insured loss ratio in fiscal year 23, and I'm wondering, does that have any impact on the budget in terms of higher premiums or risk of losing the insurance?
And I could answer this, but I prefer, I like to have the department directors have the fun experience of being in the hot seat, and so they don't get a chance to interact with council. So
I just want to make sure I get to the right.
I can talk a little bit about because actually this is good news that we can talk about. So we experienced, when I came to the city, there had been several high dollar claims, specifically related to our police department. And that put us in a situation with our insurer, City County Insurance Services, where I had to go to their board and talk to them about keeping us in the pool, which I did. And we made an agreement to start an enterprise-wide risk management program within the city, which we did do. We had an excellent risk manager that got that program moving forward. We have a new leadership in our police department that has completely transformed that organization, and Shane can pick it up from there.
It's almost the full answer to that. Can you read the whole performance measure for me?
General liability loss ratio, fiscal year 23 estimated actual is 208%. Why the measure is important? This measures the ratio of claim costs to premiums paid over the last 5 years. Anything over 100%, as they said, the actual was estimated at 208%, means that the carrier is paying more in claims than they are receiving in premiums. The 60% mark is usually the threshold where carriers evaluate future insurability. And it mentions that the claims in the last 5 years have been significantly high, but recent changes have resulted in noticeable reduction in claim frequency and cost.
Yeah, so that summarizes it quite well for me, actually. Appreciate it. So yeah, so the reason the percentage is so high has to do with our past claims experience that initiated the enterprise risk management. So the effect is there and realized already. So the enterprise risk program has lowered. That's why we've actually had the lowest claims experience, I think, in the last 10 or 15 years. So we're realizing the efforts that we've been working on over the last few years. And I just want to call out another kind of key point to this. So there's a good and bad when you have a very high deductible plan. So the bad is if you have a claim liability, you're going to be out of pocket a significant chunk of cash. So that's the high risk thing we play. But the good is that have significantly lower monthly premium costs. So as long as we maintain good behaviors and good activities and have low claims experience, it's actually a net benefit to the city because our premiums are so much lower. So we've had a really good year. Knock on wood, we continue that. A lot of thanks to not only the police department, which I think was getting a significant amount of attention, but also, the rest of our executive team in those high risk areas, which includes fire and our operational units, as well as our community development group. So really the work that they've done to kind of clean up their practices and take risk approaches to decision making has been very helpful and effective. And so we've had a good year. It's going to take a few years before we start seeing what our normal prior experience has been, but we're on a good pathway at the moment. Thank you.
Other questions?
We're gonna make some motions.
Yeah, all right.
Well,
Do we have
We
to
actually
do
start
that?
with the errata again.
Yeah,
Oh, that's right.
errata.
We haven't seen this. Another round?
Yes, for the city council.
Well, then let's.
That's next.
We actually have, believe business from the audience.
Oh, okay, I thought. All right.
We did the public hearing from state shared revenue, so
Okay.
now this is just comment from the audience.
Okay.
And so Chair, we have one member from the audience, Chris McAllister, and Chris, you can take a seat.
Be fair, I thought there was gonna be a lot more people. Sorry, y'all. One time a year I get to do this, so. Thank you, everybody. Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Chris McAllister, and I come before you as a representative of the nonprofits that are serving our community. I'd like to ask that as we consider our major budget, that we consider tripling our contribution to the HSC fund to be able to help accommodate for what we need to do in order to take care of our people and work in concert with the all-in efforts that the greater county is working on. Understanding the city of Springfield is not participating directly in those allocations. We are reserving the right to have the county determine what we need to do to serve our people. And as such, as I pointed out in my earlier testimony, that $17,000 per person to house them from the start to finish a year, that's about 170,000 if we count the 10 people we successfully helped out of the memorial building, which is 10,000 more than what we pay into the HSC. So if we could add 3 times, how much could we actually do with that one? What could we do to contribute to build futures and wholesome shelter, not just for those who are economic refugees, but for those who cannot take care of themselves, our displaced seniors. This year alone, we found 75 people over the age of 70 come to us from our communities, displaced from some of the mobile home parks that closed, as well as the nursing homes that closed when COVID hit, and we've not been able to get them. One unfortunate case that we had to work with, 97 nursing homes in the state of Oregon said no. And this person had dementia. So we need to take care of our own, and we need to look at how do we do so in an effective manner. And if we can't provide it here, if it's not part of our scope, then let's look at giving the tools to the people who we are asking to allocate it. We are a home rule charter, city and county. So we have the way to define ourselves. How we allocate, how we represent determines our future. And so as we look at planning forward, do we have enough money in the pots that we have? I get 9 calls a week just for families with children, and we don't serve families with children. We serve the singles and couples. And so even when our focuses are on families and children, we don't have enough. How can we do so without asking others to pay our debts? We are a strong, inventive, creative city. We have awesome staff. We have policies that bring people who want to live here. How do we make sure that we sustain the people who were born here, who come here for our opportunities, and who lose out because the market does not care about humanity. The market cares about itself. We need to be able to make sure that we put people who are good faith efforts with good faith money. And so I support everything that we're doing in this budget. I would just like to ask for a greater allocation, even if it's from other revenues that have been previously spoken. Because if there's overlap coverage, then we cover those people. So if we're sick, if we have undetermined cannabis funds, perhaps using that money to help allocate it. If we are trying to lower liability, we need to have a place for people to be, or else we are not in compliance with Martin versus Boise. Thank you for your time and your service.
Excuse me, can I ask what organization that you're with? I didn't catch.
I represent Carry It Forward, but I'm here as a Carry It Forward, but I am here as a citizen living in Ward 3 and born in Ward 3. Thank you.
Here we have no other individuals in person, but let me just check the participants online to see if we have anybody who's raised their hand. Second. Doesn't appear that we've got anybody raising their hand, and I have no other written or email comment.
Okay. So shall we move to the erratus summary? Okay.
Yeah.
I won't go into the detail of how the process works again. But again, normally it would come up and it would be blank. Again, there were some items that came to our attention after we put the budget together, that if we had known them at the time would have been included and need to be included in this budget prior to adoption. Starting with the parking program, this is just going to be the other side of the equation. I do want to mention the numbers have changed slightly because since we put those numbers into the budget, we've learned that there's been an increase to the vendor contract for this program. So this budget will reflect that. So we have an increase in parking program operating expenditures in Fund 204. 204 is a special revenue fund of $142,800. An increase in parking program permit revenues of $32,000. An increase of parking program fine revenue of $25,000. And then we're a decrease in the ARPA project reserves by $85,800, and that'll be for fiscal year 24 only. Staff have considered the potential places to fund this, and again, mentioning that
This program was almost self-sufficient, and then with the pandemic, it hasn't fully recovered. It seems like a logical choice, but that's really up to this group to decide or maybe make a recommendation for another funding source. And then the other item relates to the Cahoots contract. At the time we put the budget together, we knew we were in negotiations for a new contract, and that there was going to be an increase to this contract. And Cahoots has had challenges in filling positions, as every organization has around the country. Since that time, we were given the new numbers, and this reflects that contract increase. This is coming out of the general fund, so increased Cahoots contract amount. And this is in the police department, police operating expenditure of $43,816, and decrease general fund reserves by $43,816. So before we move on to consideration of other adjustments, if we could get a motion to accept these or modify them if you choose in this errata.
I'd like to make a motion to accept the erratum in the following manner. Item 1A, increased parking program expenditure by $142,800. B, increased parking program permit revenue by the amount of $32,000. Item C, increased parking program fine revenue by $25,000. D, decrease ARPA project reserves by $85,800. And in section 2A, increase Cahoots contract amount by $43,816. 2B, decrease general fund reserves by $43,816.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Actually, there's discussion.
Oh, discussion, during discussion, I'm sorry.
I'm gonna ask one quick question, if that's all right. On the Cahoots, is there any part of that money as part of the new vehicle, or I think there was a vehicle purchase? Is this part of the increased cost, or is that something else?
This program services completely.
This is operational and
Correct.
not the vehicle. Okay, thanks.
Any further discussion? All further questions? All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion. Did I hear her hand go up? I can't.
That was for me.
That was for an eye.
Oh, that's for an aye, okay. Okay, the motion passes. And so we move to the deliberation process.
Yeah, if anyone would like to make any proposed adjustments to the fiscal year 24 budget. And again, as committee members, anyone of you can make a motion. It's going to take a second to go to a vote, and a quorum is 7. We'll need 7 positive votes for it to make it onto the errata.
I need a reminder of how much was the increase for the HSC missions? What was
The request was 32,525.
more?
Correct.
525?
32,525.
And if that was to be funded, Nathan, what are some options of places, since clearly we don't have that money in the general fund?
Well, okay, so we could take it from the general fund reserve. I'm gonna just throw some different possibilities. I don't know if it would qualify potentially the special revenue, the marijuana apportionment. Another one is we have the Comcast settlement dollars in the special revenue
It's
fund.
like 500,000 in that, correct?
Yeah, just
Okay.
under, but close to 500,000. Am I missing any other potential sources of funding?
The potential of reducing department operating budgets and having folks.
By like a small increment. And didn't you say that if we did it that way, that it would have a much smaller impact on the different departments or as a whole, or?
Well, if we did it proportionally, the impact on each department, I think, would be negligible as a percentage of their budgets. But it would allow you not to, decrease the general fund reserve. It would be a way to absorb it with the proposed appropriation as it currently stands.
Hearing any more discussions?
Well, I'll make a motion to, for the additional funds of $32,525 to HSC from the Comcast fund.
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
Be a second.
And then if there's a second, we can have a discussion.
Exactly.
Okay, so second.
I seconded that.
What did you say?
She says
Are we up for discussion now?
So now there's discussion's been moved and second
So
to accept that, to come out of the Comcast.
reserves. So HSC is funded through the county and the county is funded through the state. The state just funneled down millions of dollars to HSC. I'm not confident that the county as a government is even aware that we've been asked this. And that I think that we already pay a proper amount to that fund, considering Springfield is not in the driver's seat for doing those services in the first place. So I think that they are right funded. They haven't proven to me that they need those funds. It was well orchestrated. I give them credit for that. But I don't believe that the city should be paying extra money when we already pay money into that program.
So do I understand that we're already giving $160,000?
Correct.
Yeah, no,
$162,252
yes.
already. Yes, Corey.
Thank you. So the Human Services Commission is not just funded by the county. It is funded by those of us who are partners, Springfield, Eugene, and the county all put money into the Human Services Commission. It's our way of jointly contributing to human services in our region. We are part of the decision makers for how that money gets spent. So those of us, and as Councilor Doyle and I are currently the folks who serve on the Human Services Commission, the budgeting and all of that goes through the Human Services Commission. And those dollars, not only do they go regionally, but they also come to serve like, OASIS and Catholic Community Services, the Hope and Safety Alliance, which used to be Women's Space. So while the county is the one who administers it, it is an interjurisdictional way that we all work to regionally support human services in our region. And our contribution as the city of Springfield has remained flat for several years, while the need and the expenses have gone up, which was part of what the folks testified and shared, is like the expenses are going up for those who do these services in our communities. And we want to continue to be at the table to have a say and to help to support this work. So to me, it makes sense that we would also continue to, and $36,000 or whatever it was, is not an enormous amount of money for expenses that are continuing to climb. The money that is coming in for the all-in funding is specifically for housing and specifically for certain types of housing. It's not to go to like existing operations for human services. So I just wanted to clarify what the Human Services Commission does and where the funding comes from and how we are partners in that work with the county.
Just a second. Is there a way we can take that down, that we voted on it, and make her bigger?
Sure. Corey, you're gonna become full size here. in a second.
Okay, now, Joe.
So I'm not disputing that we are partners in it. I agree, we should be partners in it, and we already are partners in it. I didn't assert that HSC is the only funding source. All the partners pay into it. We're currently paying over 130-some thousand already. So I do know they're partners. We do contribute already. What I'm saying is that for us to come to and to increase that, and I get the raising prices, but we got our own things we have to take care of, and we continually have these organizations that come to us and ask for additional funds, and we have to be careful of what we do. I disagree with what we should be. I don't believe we should increase it this year, keep it where it's at.
So this is a difficult one for me because I see both sides of this. It's hard to ignore how much costs have gone up. I mean, if anyone's been to Taco Bell recently, you know that the price of a burrito has gone up 40%. I mean, just as a small example, it just seems to be all the way across the board. And I feel like that we, as a city, talk about how we don't handle social services. That's the county's responsibility. That's the county's responsibility. And a lot of the money that we give to them actually comes from the CDBG funds, right? It's not actually coming from the city of Springfield. It's funds that have funneled down from the state. So I don't have a problem with us having not raised that, raising it the small amount that they're asking for. And I think that the Comcast is a reasonable way to do it. I probably would have said 50,000 actually, if it was me. Because that also is something that's already sitting there and we're not physically taking away from the taxpayers right now. So I would support the addition.
So that's fine if people as a majority want to increase, but then I would disagree with taking it from the Comcast fund. Okay, I would agree that if, according to Councilor Doyle says that we have state funds coming in that can go that way, then let's take it from state funds, but not from any city budget, not from any city item that has undedicated funds. If we have funds that are coming in that can be used for that, then fine, it's going to come from something else, meaning we can pay out of that. Those are the funds from the state, but something else is going to be shorted.
Yes.
So I guess here's my take, and I think I think there's 3 questions that we don't know the answer to, and so I would tell you, the committee that I would maybe recommend punting this whole conversation and letting us sort it out on council and give us a chance to get a little bit more information. When I hear the request, that $30,000 is not going to buy additional services, right? That $30,000 is going to go to sort of fund the level of services that we have today in the deal with increased costs. And I would love to have that point clarified, because I think when we talk about a world with additional need, we may not actually be buying additional services here. And I think the one thing we should consider is a sort of a vendor relationship. HSC is the only folks that showed up and asked for more money about it. We still have a lot of partners in the community that are not showing up, asking for more money, and we're all sort of going through this, right? So then I think there's a policy question there that is like, okay, if we deal with HSC, then how are we going to deal with the Bell Rapidu's and the in the Chamber of Commerce that didn't show up, and a whole group of people that have found a way to sort of soak up that additional money through creativity and work that they've done. So I think that's one set of questions that I have is like, okay, are we getting new services from it? Because I don't really see the answer. The other question that I really have here is this the position of the Lane County government? Right, because the one thing that I don't know is is the commission making this request, or is HSC making this request, or where's that thing actually coming from? And I think the third thing that I think is really kind of critical is really understanding the all-in funding. I know that Corey, you brought up a really good point that said okay, that money is specifically for housing. And then you kind of have this sort of, out of the millions of dollars that are flowing through HSC right now, you kind of have this one little need, right? That is coming into it that, that is sort of funding the day-to-day providers that exist here. And so I think I would love to hear a more technical answer to that, because if some of the money for all in could be used, right? Like $30,000 is a rounding here. Then, maybe our answer's slightly different. And then I think the fourth question that we have is, Eugene's in the middle of this too, right? Is Eugene passing an an increased allocation as well? I just think there's just more there's more information that we need for this. And my sense is maybe we don't try to hash it out right now. We let the staff get us some more information and deal with it when it gets to council.
So how does that work when it goes to council? Does it come an unfunded request?
I would assume when we have the public hearing that either Counselor Doyle or Counselor Rodley would just bring this issue back up and talk about making a modification at that point. And then that'll give Nate or Nancy a chance to get some more information about it.
And that would be before the final approval of the budget.
Right.
Comes.
Because there's another public,
Right,
outside of the
right,
budget committee,
Right.
there's another public hearing that we have after this, right? That can address this. My big concern, I think, is like that we're essentially backfilling, increased costs here, right? And it's like, well, okay, what's the rest of the picture?
So do we table that or just vote down?
Second.
Or has to be withdrawn.
So,
Yeah, I have one.
yes,
So I'm just interested in hearing from our management team that spends hundreds of hours on this whole thing, just why you decided that this line item wouldn't increase and what your perspective on that is.
Well, the request wasn't made to us, and anytime a request comes to the city manager's office, typically we would direct them that you have an opportunity during the budget process to speak directly to the budget committee and make those requests. So, we looked at the resources we had and the funding that we committed to, and we put together a proposed budget that we thought was appropriate. But there's always this opportunity for public agencies to come in and make additional requests.
So different entities have throughout these months that you put your budget together have emailed you, talked to you, asked for things, and you've thought through everything and presented the budget that you felt the city needed to.
Typically, we fund the services we've already committed to. We don't add additional services. I think we're identifying there's questions to what this actually purchases, whether it's additional or just maintain status quo. But if it's an addition of services, we would always go in front of our council and look to them for guidance. This is the process to do that. But one of the processes.
But you do include inflation in other areas because things are getting more expensive, as long as it's not a different service, is that right?
So we do include inflation. We have a lot of vendor contracts that we manage. Sometimes those vendor contracts aren't determined by the time we put together the budget, or even by the time we come to budget committee. And so we'll make a best guess at what we think those vendor contracts will look like. I can tell you that as someone who manages multiple contracts, I negotiate hard to keep costs flat if I can keep them flat. If they are going to increase, I try to keep that to a minimum. There's different ways we can go about that. Whenever a contract we feel is starting to get to, higher the market, we can go back out and do an RFP and see if we can find someone else who can do it for less. So it's not an easy answer, but no, we just don't automatically add inflators to all of the services we provide. In a perfect world, nothing would inflate.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that, right now, as we deliberate about the budget, we're here at a point in time. And as we are here discussing that, we have other needs that we know and expenses that we know will be coming forward. For instance, we are in the process of negotiating union contracts, that will have, we don't yet know what because that process is not yet complete. So we have to kind of make I look at our budget as what are the core functions of the city that our community expects from the city and asks for us to do. And we look at what are our own inflationary costs, and we try to ratchet those down as much as we possibly can. The departments are very conscientious about their budgets. I can tell you, they run them very lean, and we have kept them, below actual inflation. So in net effect, it's kind of a cut to departments. So even if you may have an amount set aside in a fund, oftentimes we may have a reserve fund where we we're trying to put money there toward a project or infrastructure or something like that. And we have some high dollar infrastructure costs that we know are going to be hitting. We have some right now in our Justice Center. Our fires, our stations are old. They need, all of our buildings need a lot of maintenance. I mean, just kind of take a look around you. You can kind of see this is not the Taj Mahal. So that's what we go in with our core services at the snapshot in time. And then you do get responses from the community during the budget process. And so our job is really to explain what the process is, explain what the sources are and the uses are for funds. And then we leave that up to this body as you're appointed by the council. And then the council is the ultimate arbiters of the budget. So I hope that makes sense.
On that same line is that when the city, we have a taxable valuation increase per year. So what our increase, our valuation, the increases are what, what's the percentage, our valuation increase annual?
Well, we have the collar of 3% that comes from measure 50, but through growth, we sometimes exceed that, but then through loss of industry and other reasons, sometimes it's less than that. But typically it averages around 3 to 3.1% historically over time.
And so typically you shoot for, if you're gonna do increases or look at increases of what people are asking you for, you don't want to exceed that or you're going backwards. And that particular increase is right around 25%. Even though it's not small numbers, but you gotta look at, if you're putting out more than what you're getting in, you're going backwards and something else is gonna pay. That's why I'm so vocal about that.
I was gonna just have one more thing, Jason, is that typically as staff, we look at our charter and the core services that we provide. If we're gonna make recommendations to our governing body on increases, is typically gonna be because we don't feel that we are meeting the core services that we're supposed to be providing to the community. Typically, our recommendations aren't gonna venture into areas that touch on core services.
Should I call for the question? Do we need to vote?
So either the motion can be withdrawn or we have to go forward with the vote.
Okay, Ruth made the motion.
I'll withdraw the motion because I think it makes a lot of sense for the more information to come into the conversation before decisions.
So we move on to the motion to approve the budget as with the change that we had earlier. Is that correct?
So, yeah, well, then, so I would see if there's any other proposed adjustments.
Any other proposed adjustments to the budget?
And then move on to the motions.
All right, so now we'll move on to the motion to approve the budget, including just the one change on the parking, right? And
There's two changes on
marijuana.
that. Detail that.
Yeah. So do I read that?
No.
Joe's gonna read it. Okay.
So I'll propose the first item with that change. Or that change, accept that change, and then the motion for the budget, first budget item under the recommendations.
Yeah, do it the same way we did it for CETA.
Who's this first?
I think the motion is to accept the budget as proposed by the city manager in the amount of $800 with the, and then gut domination those items.
You want that spelled out?
Yes, if you could for the record.
Excuse me. I'd like to make a motion to approve the budget as proposed by the city manager with the following changes as proposed in the budget erratum as follows. 1A, increased parking program expenditure of $142,800. 1B, increased parking program permit revenue of $32,000. 1C, increased parking program fine revenue by $25,000. 1D, decrease ARPA project reserves by $85,800. Section 2A, increase Cahoots contract by the amount of $43,816. 2B, decrease general fund reserves by $43,816.
Second.
A second discussion.
Okay, yeah, discussion, is there any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No,
We have two, so do we have to poll? I have two.
I think we don't put out for the record. You think we need to go down and do each individual or we?
Oh, I think we know it's Victoria and Corey.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
I would.
So Neil will do the roll call.
Okay.
Sure, 1 second. Counselor Weber,
Yes.
Counselor Mo,
Yes.
Counselor Riley,
no,
Counselor Blackwell,
Yes.
Counselor Doyle,
No.
Counselor Pictionary,
Yeah.
Susan Miller,
Yes.
Devin Marche Duncan,
Yes.
Darlene Reich,
Yes.
Ruth Linoz,
Yes.
Arthur Iyer,
Yes.
Paul Selby.
Yes.
Okay, Chair, we have 10 in favor, 2 opposed.
So the motion is approved. So we go on to the next. You're gonna do, are you gonna do them all? I'm just
I will.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion to direct council to levy a property tax for the 2023-24 fiscal year at the rate of 4.7403 per thousand valuation.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Corey, you raised your hand as opposed?
no, I'm an aye on the property tax.
Okay, thank you. So motion passes. So the next motion,
I'd like to make a motion to direct council to levy a special operating local option property tax for the 2023-24 fiscal year at the rate of 0.38 per thousand valuation, otherwise known as the fire local option levy.
Second.
discussion? Call for the question. All those in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. And we got one more.
We got 2 more. I'd like to make a motion to direct council to levy a special operating local option property tax for the 2023-24 fiscal year at the rate of $1.40 per thousand valuation, otherwise known as the police and court local option levy.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. And now the last one.
I'd like to make a motion to levy an additional $3,979,058 for the retirement of the city's bonded indebtedness.
Second.
Any discussion? Question, call for the question. All those in favor say aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Thank you all.
We're done.
I really quick, I want to thank all of you for a really thoughtful conversation this year and for giving your time to support the process. I also want to thank the city staff for all the hard work that went into putting this together and making this evening happen. And specifically, I want to call out Neil Obringer. He's the heavy lifter for this budget process. Thank you, Neil.
Thanks, everyone.